Once again, we want to visit the Cold War, where there is a superpower on the west side and a superpower on the east side. These two don't directly fight with each other, but they'll declare war on each other in different places. Like for example, they go to Vietnam and ruin the country just to have influence. You can say that about the Korean War or the Afghanistan War. All they were trying to do is spread their ideology around the world. To do this, they needed very advanced weapons. The competition gets so serious that, for example, the US develops a plane like the SR-71 in the year 1964. If you look at it in the 1960s, this airplane was insane, and people wouldn't believe such a plane actually flies. The Soviets were doing the same thing. They were always trying to one-up the US with their airplanes and other types of weapons. But you could say the Russians really like to make the biggest things, like the biggest bombs, the biggest planes, and the biggest missiles. We told you all this to tell you what was going on at that time. In the 1950s, the Cold War is beginning to get extremely serious around the world, and both the US and the Soviet Union felt like they were lacking a bomber, an advanced bomber to be exact. The US did have the B-52 bomber, but this is not a strategic airplane. It could go long distances, carry a lot of weight, but it can't really escape or be secretive. At that time, you could say the US government wanted all types of advanced military weapons, and they were throwing all the money they could, and they were trying to spend as much as possible. What the US government really needed was a quick bomber that could carry a lot of weight and be considered a strategic bomber, so it could work by itself. If you compare the 1950s and 1960s airplane technology, you'll see that the quality and the engineering grew exponentially, and most of that had to do with the amount of money the US and Soviet Union were spending on research and development. In the year 1957, the Department of Defense invites airplane manufacturers to the Pentagon and asks them, "We need a bomber and we need it quick." What they requested was that they needed a giant bomber that could fly at a speed of Mach 3.0. Mach 1 is the speed of sound, so 3 times the speed of sound. They needed the plane to cruise at an altitude of 75,000 feet, carry 22.5 tons of bombs, and have a range of 12,000 kilometers. The manufacturers designed different types of bombers for the government, but they chose 2 companies. One was Boeing, and the other one was North American Aviation, which doesn't exist anymore because they got bought out by Boeing. Nobody believed that Boeing would lose this battle because almost every bomber that the government bought beforehand was made by Boeing. And with everybody's surprise, North American Aviation was the chosen one. The people in the Pentagon really liked the wing design of North American Aviation, and they believed because it could slant down, it could handle much more vibration at speeds higher than Mach 2. When North American Aviation's design got approved, they named it the XB-70 Valkyrie. North American Aviation built the fastest bomber in history. It has 6 jet engines in a row. When this airplane was designed and actually built, it shocked a lot of engineers because for its time, it was extremely aerodynamic, and whenever you played with its wing to close it up and down, everybody thought it was a space alien. You might already know this, but the SR-71 was built with titanium, and that was because so it could handle the extreme heat. XB-70 on the other hand was built with a mix of titanium and steel sheets, so it was heavier but much stronger. This airplane could carry 22.5 tons of bombs with 4 passengers and speed all the way up to Mach 3. When the Department of Defense accepted this deal, they told them they need this airplane quick, so get to working. But building a bomber like this at that time is no joke, so it took about 7 years for the first prototype to be built. They would test this airplane, but with each test, they would come up with a new issue every time. You might know this, but in an aircraft, it's much more serious to have a problem than a machine, and that is why they had to make sure everything is perfect before they flew it. For its first flight, it successfully took off and had no issues in the air, but once they tried to land, the brakes locked up and caused a fire on the tires. But it seems like this plane was like the 7 Series BMW. If you don't know this car, it's one of the most problematic cars in existence, because when you fix something, there's 2 more things that you need to fix, and it's a never-ending cycle. The XB70 was very similar to that. In the second flight test, they told the pilot to go at a speed of Mach 1 to see what happens. After the plane reached Mach 1, it seems like it ran through a sandblaster, because look at how the paint came off. Either way, they would keep flight testing the XB70 and figure out new problems every time. Then we get to flight test number 12. This time, they're flying at a speed of Mach 2.5, and the piece of the inside of the plane breaks off and goes inside 4 of the jet engines. Since the other 2 jet engines were still working, they were able to land successfully. But once they inspected the airplane, they realized that all 6 engines are damaged and need to be replaced. They put 6 brand new jet engines and tried to test it again. And this time, they reached the speed of Mach 2.7. When the XB70 reaches speed Mach 2.7, a piece of the right wing breaks off. This time, it was still good to go and it was able to fly, so they landed it successfully with a broken piece of wing. You could say this time, the Pentagon is extremely pissed, so they sent some agents to beat up some engineers. That was obviously a joke, but the Department of Defense was extremely pissed off about this. They spent a whole lot of money, and they're seeing nothing but problems. The worst part is that it's taking so long that the Soviets have designed a surface-to-air missile that could easily shoot this thing down. 2 XB70s are built, and every day they're causing a problem, and the people in charge don't know what to do. This was the time where they asked for help from other departments. NASA has a lot of experience with supersonic airplane, because around this time they had access to the SR-71 and the X-15. So the Pentagon asked NASA to send engineers to help North American aviation engineers so they can figure out the XB-70. NASA's help was very successful, because in 1966, the XB-70 reached Mach 3.0. Few weeks after this, when the XB-70 is sent up with some fighters to take photos, one of the fighters loses control and collides with the XB-70. The fighter blows up midair and it causes the XB-70 to lose control and free fall down. When NASA engineers helped North American aviation, they put their name on the back wing, like the SR-71. Unfortunately, after the XB-70 crashed and got completely destroyed, the project was pretty much dead. And you could say NASA and the Pentagon were devastated that this happened only a few weeks after the successful testing. And obviously, the budget was cut off to work on this aircraft. And after all this, the XB-70 was a forgotten plane. The program died, but it helped a lot of other fields, especially aircraft engineering. The military gained a lot of experience from working on this plane. When the US was building the XB-70, the Soviet knew what type of plane they're building, and they were working on their own type of bomber, called the M50. They built this airplane, and some people believe that it's the most beautiful aircraft of all time. But looks aren't everything, because just like the XB-70, the M50 was a failure as well. Either way, for a person to succeed, they can't be afraid of failure. People that reach the higher ups failed a lot before they got there. C-5M Super Galaxy, the biggest military cargo aircraft in the world. This thing has a length of 75 meters and it's 20 meters in height. And if you want to compare it to a building, it's about a 6 or 7 story building. The wingspan of this aircraft is about 68 meters. The wing area of the C-5M is 576 square meters. Anything heavy the US military needs to move around, they use this aircraft to do so. From tanks to other heavy objects that fit on pallets. When you look at this airplane, you think it's brand new, but it's not new at all. This airplane was originally named C-5, and it was made in 1968 by the Lockheed Company, not Lockheed Martin, because when this aircraft was designed, it was Lockheed by themselves. And even though 54 years has passed from this aircraft's life, but it's extremely user-friendly, and the US military has no plans in replacing it with anything else. From 1968 all the way to 1989, 131 of these aircrafts were made. In the year 2002, the US military realized that these aircrafts are starting to get old and the technology is not up to modern standards. And that is why in the year 2002, Lockheed was already turned into Lockheed Martin and they had a new mission on file. And the mission was to recondition, or should I say restore, 80% of these C-5 aircrafts. The 80% of the aircrafts that were reconditioned changed their name, and they're known as the C-5M Super Galaxy aircraft, and the ones that are not upgraded are still called the C-5. This aircraft is like the F-22, and we have a clip of it on our other channel, and by that we mean the US has not sold it to any other country. Obviously this thing doesn't have the capabilities and technology of the F-22, but in terms of not selling it to any other country, it's similar to the F-22. When Lockheed Martin was restoring these old aircrafts, they said when we're done with them, they're gonna be good until 2040. So when they're done, they're gonna be nearly 80 years old. The way this aircraft is designed is that the nose opens up all the way and a ramp comes down so you can start loading up. Even though all these aircrafts were reconditioned, it wasn't that expensive for the government. The project that made these aircrafts turn brand new cost about $454 million. And if you look at it, that's a great deal for the government. They reconditioned their C-5 airplane, and that was with the money of a few brand new aircrafts. The C-5M is a very efficient, reliable aircraft. Just like we said, it was $454 million to restore 80% of them. And the cost of using this aircraft is lower than any other. They're planning on using this aircraft for years to come without any plans of retiring it. Fighter jets, bombers, spy planes are extremely expensive to operate, and whenever they fly, it's gonna cost about $1 million at least. But when you're using the C-5M, it doesn't get pricey like that. It carries the heaviest object the military needs, and with the lowest cost possible, it gets to the destination. So how much can this aircraft actually handle? You could load about 127 tons in the back of this thing, and with all this weight, without needing refueling, it could travel for 3,450 kilometers. And for an aircraft that's carrying this much weight, it's very impressive. Another positive thing about this aircraft is that even though it's an old aircraft, it's actually very fuel efficient, and when you compare it to other cargo aircrafts, it's one of the best. If you fill this thing all the way and want to take off, it will weigh about 381 tons. So if it's fully packed, 381 tons is lifting into the air. This heavy aircraft needs a lot of tires, and that's why 28 of them are underneath this thing, so when it lands, it could handle it. When this aircraft was designed in 1968, everything was analog, and that was one of the main reasons it needed upgrades. So when Lockheed Martin started restoring these things in 2002, they modernized everything and made it digital. When they turned everything digital, it's much easier to control everything while you're flying, and also any issues that come up inside the aircraft, they get a warning light, and you could compare it to a check engine light on your car. The cargo area looks like a warehouse when you walk in, and the size is about 880 cubic meters, and that means 463 full pallets will fit in here. If it's trying to carry tanks, 2 M1 Abrams will fit inside. If they're trying to carry helicopters, 6 Apaches fit in here. And if it's trying to carry Humvees, meaning the Hummers that the military uses, you can fit 15 of them. You might ask, with all this room, why do they only carry 2 tanks? And that's because the M1 Abrams weighs 55 tons each, and when you add both of them together, it's 110 tons. The C-5M can only carry 128 tons, so that means 3 tanks will not be able to fit in here. After it's carrying all that weight, you could put 72 personnel inside this thing as well. If you've seen our video about the A380 we made earlier, you'll know that they stopped making the A380. One of the first reasons that they stopped making it is the cost of operating. But in this video, we want to go to the factory and see how this airplane is made. All the body pieces are hauled to the factory, from the main piece to the wings. When you compare the parts next to a truck, they're ginormous. This is one of the wings. These parts are hauled to the main factory. When they're set up correctly, they're put together by order. The employees that work in this factory are very different from your ordinary assembly line because they have to be master technicians or engineers because it's not that easy to work on an airplane like this. This is the small tail wing that goes on the back, but it's not very small compared to other things. In this factory, they put everything together and they only paint one section, and that's the tailpiece. After the body panels are finished and connected, and the tailpiece is painted, they haul it to the next warehouse, and that's for the jet engines. Four jet engines has to be equipped to the A380. Airbus used two different engines on their plane. The first one was the Rolls-Royce Trent 900. The second one was an alliance between General Electric and Pratt & Whitney called the GP7200. When the engines are equipped, they go for testing. Right now, the airplane is able to fly, but the interior is completely empty and only the cockpit is working. This particular A380 is being built for Qatar Airways, and it has to be painted to their specs. After testing the airplane, it enters the paint room, or should I say the painting booth. This metal rod you're seeing that's coming down from the plane is to adjust the plane perfectly in the paint booth. After it is set down correctly, they start the process of painting it. They first cover the areas they don't want paint on, including the rear tail that's already painted. They used 3,600 liters of paint to paint an A380. Each liter weighs about 1.5 kilograms. So if you calculate it, the paint alone weighs 5.5 tons. The blue sheets you're seeing being peeled is for the design of the logos. And before they start painting it, they have to cover it up. We could say 99% of passenger aircrafts are painted white. The main reason for that is it reflects heat and it doesn't let the cockpit get too hot. Another reason is that you could see it much easier than any other color. The A380 is painted, but the interior is completely empty. And that's when it enters another warehouse that's only for interiors. The A380 is not a small airplane, and that is why in this huge area there has to be a lot of stuff fitted. They first start with the insulation and the wall pieces. Then we have the stairway to the second story. We have the luggage spaces that's fitted in the middle. In an A380, you could fit 853 people, but that's in a way the seats are laid out in economy fashion. But most people that ordered the A380 want a huge business and first class section, so it's gonna be much less people than 853. And when they do that, most of the space is taken up by first class and business class. Most airliners that ordered the A380 wanted not only the first class, but a suite with it as well. And that's basically a private room for the flyer. This is the first class station on an A380 made for Qatar Airways. The biggest passenger aircraft is ready, but unfortunately, the A380 is not made anymore. But the ones that were built are gonna be flying for a very long time. When the A380 was being built, it had an average price of $450 million, but that's not counting the luxurious first class and suite sections. That added much more to the price. The A380 is mostly used in long distance trips because it's too expensive to go a short distance. And that is why, if you want to fly from Doha to New York, the first class ticket will cost about $25,000 to $35,000, and the difference in price is because of the seasons.